After slamming the east coast of the U.S. on Friday, Hurricane Florence continues to batter the region with heavy rains. As controversy rises over President Trump's hurricane-related tweets, how is the U.S. president keeping afloat? And spies and cross-strait ties. Beijing is cracking down on Taiwan spies. What's the latest? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. Hurricane Florence slammed into the east coast of the U.S. on Friday, leaving a trail of chaos and whipping up a political storm in its path. The Category 1 hurricane hit Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina at 7:15 a.m., with several East Coast states as well as Washington, D.C. declaring a state of emergency ahead of the storm. At least 17 storm-related deaths have been reported so far. Almost 1 million people lost power on Saturday, and torrential rains continue to batter the region. Florence was downgraded from a tropical storm to a tropical depression on Sunday, but concerns about flooding, infrastructure problems and more casualties remain. The storm has also opened fresh wounds surrounding Hurricane Maria, which hit Puerto Rico last year. A new report that claims the hurricane's death toll was much higher than originally reported has enraged U.S. President Donald Trump, who says the report is part of a conspiracy theory to make him look bad. So what troubles has this latest tempest unleashed? How costly will it be? And has President Trump once again found himself in deep water? Joining me for the discussion in Beijing is Chi Ye, Professor of Environmental Policy at Tsinghua University and Director of the Brookings Tsinghua Center for Public Policy, and from Philadelphia, Blackburn-Dwyer, founder of Grasshopper Strategies. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Brandon, let me go to you first. How do you think the U.S. is responding to Hurricane Florence this time? Has the mood relatively calmed since Friday, or are people living in the path of the storm worried about more damage yet to come?
A little bit of both. I would say that there's been a pretty impressive sense of perseverance in the region. The fears leading up to the storm hitting the U.S. East Coast on Thursday and Friday were of a substantially worse situation. When it was a Category 4 storm, while it was still out in the ocean, people were talking about, possibly a storm of the century, possibly the worst storm that we'd seen in decades in the area. By the time it made landfall, it had been downgraded to a Category 1, which is good news in terms of it wasn't as damaging, it wasn't as deadly as people were expecting, but it also does possibly distract people from the fact that it is still very concerning for the region. There's still going to be billions of dollars of damage. There is still going to be flooding that is supposed to not hit its peak until the end of today or probably tomorrow for the region. This storm could be the worst of the last 10 years. And we have to keep in mind this storm was hit 2 years ago by a storm that caused almost $5 billion in North Carolina alone. So the region is still struggling. People are still without power. People are still living in shelters. 18 people have been confirmed to be killed. It's still very concerning.
Yeah. How do you think the U.S. government prepared the region for the storm this time?
I think they did a much better job. When you look at something like the nuclear power plant fears, this was a big topic in the media leading up to it. Two of the power plants were shut down in advance because of the federal laws that say once winds hit 75 miles per hour, they have to be shut down. We also learned a lot in the region from the storm 2 years ago, where some of the levees were broken or damaged, some of the local dams were problematic. This time around, we've seen much less failure of local and state resources to protect communities from flooding, but still we're facing worse flooding than they did 2 years ago. So communities and real estate and individuals are much more at risk.
Right. Professor Chi, as we just heard, Florence was downgrading pretty fast from a Category 5 storm to a Category 1 storm, and then from a tropical storm to a tropical depression. So once a storm reaches such a stage, what are the biggest concerns and threats?
I think, as Brandon just talked about, the biggest concern right now is the flood water and the power outage right now, and also the people are having trouble, staying away from their homes and to restore to the normal life. As more and more these kind of extreme weather in the recent years, and people are now better prepared, but still the devastating weather events like this is getting more and more, and you know, the really troubling fact is we'll be facing this kind of weathers more and more in the future.
How would you, Professor Chi, compare the severity of Florence to other tropical storms that have ravaged this area? We heard this storm that Brenda mentioned 2 years ago, but there were also the famous Hugo in 1989 and Fran in 1996. So in terms of damage and casualties, how do you compare these?
Apparently this time the Florence, since it has downgraded when it comes to landfall, is not as devastating as we have expected, and that compared to the previous Hugo, for example, this time around, it has done much less damages so far. But nevertheless, we have seen, you know, confirmed the deaths of 18. That's we still yet to see the final numbers, and the billions of dollars loss is a big concern in North Carolina alone. So yes, it is not as bad as anticipated, but it's still it's a very big loss.
Yeah, Florence was seen as a major test for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Brendan, they were heavily criticized as slow and unprepared last year for Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. Do you think FEMA may pass the test this time?
It's a little early to tell. I would say that overall the response has been better. There's been a lot of learning. I think that North Carolina and South Carolina state resources also deserve a lot of, frankly, praise for what they've been able to mobilize so quickly. FEMA has come under attack after almost every major hurricane. It wasn't just Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico last year. It was also the hurricane that struck Houston, Texas, and the southern parts of Texas. FEMA is a popular whipping boy. Now, sometimes they really do deserve that criticism. I think that in both Texas and Puerto Rico, they were massively underprepared, particularly in Puerto Rico, not understanding how to create some crucial supply lines to an island territory of the United States was devastating and caused unneeded deaths because of the delays. In North and South Carolina, we're seeing a better response, but we really won't know until we really start seeing how FEMA helps people dig out. Because what we're going to see over the next 24 hours is that people are going to go, oh, I heard the storm is over, I want to return home, but they're not realizing the flooding is actually not going to be at its worst until tomorrow morning. And that's where we're going to see some unneeded deaths.
Okay, let's take a look at the political front. Hurricane Florence has, as I said, stirred some new controversy surrounding Hurricane Maria, which slammed Puerto Rico almost exactly a year ago. Now, a new independent report published by researchers at George Washington University in August said that 2,975 people died from that disaster from September last year to February this year. That is significantly higher than the original number. U.S. President Donald Trump attacked the report on Thursday with this tweet, and we're going to show it to you right there. He said, 3,000 people did not die in the two hurricanes that hit Puerto Rico. When I left the island after the storm had hit, they had anywhere from 6 to 18 deaths. As time went by, it did not go up by much. Then a long time later, they started to report really large numbers, like 3,000. This was done by the Democrats in order to make me look as bad as possible when I was successfully raising billions of dollars to help rebuild Puerto Rico. If a person died for any reason, just old age, just add them onto the list. Bad politics. I love Puerto Rico. By the way, Puerto Rican Governor Ricardo Rossello responded to Trump's tweets saying there is no reason to underscore the tragedy. Professor Chi, from a scientific perspective, can casualty numbers really shoot up like that after a major disaster?
You know, the death toll, it really depends on not only on the scale of the disaster like the Hurricane Maria, but also has to do with the vulnerability of a region. In places, you know, with the combination of the level of Hurricane Maria and also in Puerto Rico, I'm not surprised if the death toll can reach to 1,000 level. On the other hand, though, any scientific report must report not only the final finding of a number, but also the data and the methodology they used. I think that, as a scientist, that's the really what the evidence is we need to see. And when politics get into this kind of debate, it get to be unnecessarily complicated. I think the most important thing is look at the evidence, look at the data, look at the methodology they use. That's the most important thing.
Yeah,
right?
But for the general public, who should we believe? Where should we turn if we really want to find out real numbers of a casualty? For instance, in China, we have the National Bureau of Statistics or relevant authority who are in charge of tallying this kind of statistics. Where would you look to in the United States, Brandon?
Well, I would look at the long-term studies. The big difference here, and first of all, let's just deal with the fact that this is not a conspiracy. The Democrats in Congress, who Trump has seemingly blamed, had nothing to do with this. This is about scientists and organizations on the ground measuring the death toll over time. That's the big difference. The death toll that President Trump referenced when he left the island were the people that had been hit by trees during it, that were reported dead on arrival at a hospital. But when you're dealing with a area like Puerto Rico, as big as it is, with rural areas that were hard to access, first of all, the original death toll doesn't take into account anybody that couldn't be counted in the first 24 to 48 hours. So of course it's going to go up. What the study that he was so concerned about jumped to 3,000 is, one, it took into account deaths that hadn't been reported. It took into account deaths over the period of between two different hurricanes hitting it. And it also looked at people that would have been saved if public services like utilities, if hospitals, if water were actually available to them. And it's that kind of measurement that's actually a lot more accurate. Frankly, it's actually a lot closer to how we measure the financial impact of a hurricane, and we just use the same wider angle lens to look at death tolls, and that's how we get to 3,000. For me, that's a pretty accurate number. It lined up with a lot of the anecdotal reports that was being reported by media on the ground, by NGOs on the ground, and by indications from government authorities.
Okay.
President Trump is off the mark. He's also distracting from needed preparations for Florence.
Okay, let's turn our eyes back in China, because we also had Typhoon Mangkhut, who is one of the most powerful storms to hit the region, to hit southern China in decades, after the storm killed 65 people in the Philippines. Professor Chi, in terms of the intensity of the storms, are we seeing any patterns? Is there any relation between what's happening in the United States and with this one here in China?
Yeah, the two, the hurricane Florence and this typhoon Mangkhut, they are related. As a tropical storm phenomenon, and this is also related as a consequence of climate change, as the scientists have predicted in the past, and we have seen this pattern. Just this year, we have seen not only here in China, Philippines, and United States, but also in Japan, and we are unfortunately we're getting to see more of these kind of events, the weather extremes in the future.
Because of global warming?
Because of the global warming, this has becoming a pattern of new climate change, a new normal for climate change. Right.
We have to go. Many thanks to my two guests in the Beijing studio, Professor Chi Ye of Environmental Policy at Tsinghua University and Director of the Brookings Tsinghua Center for Public Policy, and from Philadelphia, Brandon Blackburn-Dwyer, founder of the Grasshopper Strategies. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, Beijing is cracking down on a series of Taiwanese spy cases. Why are Chinese mainland university students being targeted? Stay with us. Beijing accused Taiwan's spy agencies of stepping up efforts to steal intelligence with the aim of infiltration and sabotage. Details were disclosed in the rare series of programs detailing cases where Chinese mainland students studying in Taiwan were targeted by spies who lure them with money, affection, and friendship. According to the state television of China, CCTV, over 100 espionage cases involving Taiwanese spies have been prosecuted this year under the Thunderbolt 2018 crackdown run by the Ministry of State Security. The crackdown highlights the security challenges to authorities in the mainland under strained cross-strait relations. Beijing and Taipei frequently trade accusations of spying, but trying to coax university students into spying was particularly vile in nature, according to the TV reports. Now, Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Bureau responded to the reports with a statement saying Beijing had fabricated the stories, which would only make Taiwanese people more wary of Beijing. So what was revealed and what is special about the recent crackdown? What do opinion polls on the island tell about people's feeling towards the mainland? I'm joined in the studio by Zhong Houtao, researcher at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Wang Yuqing, a PhD candidate in Peking University from Taiwan. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now let's talk about one example which was cited in this report. A young man from the Chinese mainland went to study in Taiwan where he needed help, and he got help from a very looking lady, and they developed a friendship. Eventually it developed into some kind of a romantic relationship. This seemed like a cliche story, but it didn't turn out so nice and rosy. This young man was arrested for leaking state secret, and it turned out that this lovely lady was actually a spy. Wang Yuqing, what do you make of such a story? Do you think it's a typical spy story, or it's exceptional?
Well, I feel it's exceptional, because I feel mainland China was blow the whistle for Taiwanese authority to stop to keep doing like these type of things, because many years, a lot of Taiwanese authority, they try to get much information as possible from the a student from mainland China to inside the school, because why they want to learn why they want to get the information is they want to know about some story they not really never heard it, even not read of the report. They want to just knowing by the communication to know the detailed information. Then in the future maybe they will be into intelligence. Some of them I have watching the show. It's very interesting. Is they're asking for the student to gather their inside report, research report, especially some like a military technology inside report, and those reports very secrecy. Also, it's not allowed to expose for the outside. Of course. Not even going to showing to Taiwan. So that's why for me I believe it's kind of blow the whistle to the Taiwan authority.
Right. Dr. Zhong, what do you think is the message that the authorities in Beijing are trying to send to Taiwan, and also what message do you think the government wants to convey by revealing such cases and making them and sending warnings to college students?
I think the Chinese mainland is sending a strong signal to Taiwan authority. After taking her office, Taiwan has been refusing to accept 1992 consensus and take measures to do some spies and infiltration in Chinese mainland. So I think that is actually is really doing something wrong for the Chinese mainland key interest. So the Chinese mainland is compelled to take some countermeasures. So that is to remind Taiwan authorities they should immediately stop and end any kind of such activities. Otherwise, they will be punished. And at the same time, I think the Chinese mainland is also sending some signal to those students in Taiwan, from Chinese mainland, to remind them that they should try to learn how to protect themselves. They should realize the reality, and they should realize that they should not be defeated by the Taiwan authority.
It is revealed that Chinese mainland students who major in political science, in economics and national defense are particularly likely to be targeted by Taiwanese spies. What makes them so vulnerable in particular? Wang Yuqing.
Well, firstly, as I said before, they really want to get some information by communication each other, and then maybe a coffee shop, and then they can discuss in more detail. Because after the show, I have seen other other local news. They also mention about how to crack down the spy. Some cases is just they have meeting and then close the door and they just talk. They just pretend say, hey, I'm a student, I'm really interested more about what you study.
But what about these majors, Dr. Zhong, that political science, economics, of course, national defense. What makes these students particularly vulnerable?
As those who major in political and economic sciences, I think maybe in future they could have a good chance to serve in the Chinese mainland government. So in this way, they could serve as a channel for Taiwan authority. In this way, they could get some information, especially some information, secret information, even some confidential and top secret information for Taiwan authority. So the Taiwan authority has been for preparing a long-term program.
What has been the change, however, in the espionage tactic carried out by the Taiwanese authorities? Right now we're seeing that university students that are being targeted. Is this something new in recent years, Dr. Zhong?
In Liangjiang area, I mean in Jiang Jingguo and his father Jiang Jianshi, and then exactly, and that time they mostly target Chinese mainland military and in government officials, and in Li Denghui and Chen Shuibian time, and that time they also follow Liang Jiang's tactics. But in mind you, and that time, based on the 1992 consensus, the two sides stopped this kind of espionage activities. Unfortunately, after Tsai Ing-wen taking her office, she resumed the Li Denghui and Chen Shuibian's tactics. Unfortunately, there is no official communication between the two sides. I mean, there is no official channel between the two sides. So the Tsai Ing-wen authority has no other choice but to make use of those Chinese mainland students as a channel.
So there's a change of tactic. Also, we understand that the Thunderbolt 2018 crackdown has also prosecuted over 100 espionage cases carried out by Taiwan this year. What does this figure say, Wang Yuqing, about the scale of espionage activities carried out?
Well, it's more fully very widely the scale. Like it's not just only, as I know, it's not just a student. You know, in the show, as I read on watching the show, in the end of the show, they even contact with the Taiwanese businessmen, because Taiwanese businessmen was every time have many chance go for those exchange activities, knowing a lot of a higher officer for mainland China. What happened is they really interested. They say, what do you know? Can we make a friend? Can we we found you to know that official and to get more information. So that one, I see the very full scale. It's not just a student. Also, even I believe both sides, mainland and Taiwan, the Taiwan people all been hurt by this incident.
Yeah, so, I want to ask Dr. Zhong as well. What's the damage? What's the visible and invisible damage of the stepped-up espionage activity?
I think it will become a great damage for cross-strait relations, especially for the feeling of the common people on both sides. As for cross-strait relation, I think it will severely hurt the mutual trust between the two sides. As Tsai Ing-wen refused to accept 1992 consensus, there is already no consensus between the two sides. I think this will continue to worsen the cross-strait relations. And another point is that it will shrink the amount of the people between the two sides.
Yeah, well, I have this statement from Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council, which they released on Saturday, and they say that the stories have been fabricated and that Beijing is using students as political pawns to diminish student interest in Taiwanese university program. Wang Yuqing, how do you respond to that?
I think that's not true. You know, they say something really useless. For example, they should understand the quality of education in Taiwan is not better than before. If you are parents, you have sent tuition, you can study in US or you can study in Taiwan. Then what happens is which one you will choose? Of course you will choose the better education. So I think the Taiwan authority try to blend the trouble to China, to mainland China. Then I really feel that kind of dirty trick. I think they should stop that, because the mainland China student not going to Taiwan for study is not because politics. Mostly, as I know, I have a lot of friends going to Taiwan. They more spending on the travel, not really study. So that's why. That's what happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, another piece of information has been that, as I mentioned in the leading, the Beijing side is accused of using these stories, or the Taiwanese side say that such report will make Taiwanese people more wary of Beijing, whereas according to latest data from Taiwan Public Opinion Foundation, the people of respondents who believe that de jure independence is better for Taiwan has decreased by 15% over the past 2 years, from 50% to 36%, and on the other hand, there has been a marked increase of respondents who prefer political integration with the Chinese mainland, rising from 15% to 26%. Dr. Zhong, what does that trend reflect?
This trend reflects that the Taiwan's cross-strait relations policies is totally disappointed by Taiwan people. Taiwan maintained that she could maintain the peace and stability across strait relations, but those Taiwan people now realize that is just a lie. The Taiwan has no ability to maintain peace and stability. So
yeah, Wang Yuqing, are you surprised with the data?
You know, well, I won't surprise because the Taiwan government, the authority of Taiwan, Taiwan authority, really doing a bad job. Also, when they meeting a lot of disaster, they really hopeless. Give people feel hopeless in Taiwan, and also when the governor come out, the official come out to speak to people, they always speak something really useless, and also keeping blaming, say, oh, KMT's fault, Mainland's fault, everybody's fault, not their fault. So that's when people really start to feel, why I trust you, why I want to listen to you. So that's what happened.
Okay, so, and on top of that, you have these espionage cases, which are really not making things any better. Many thanks to my two guests. We have to leave it there. Zhong Houtao, researcher at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Wang Yuqing, a PhD candidate in Peking University from Taiwan. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.